it's exciting to be here and to have the chance to talk about community science from the educator perspective. A lot of what I think about is how can we join the outcomes that we desire for our students with those that we need to build science literacy in the community. All right, so when I think about my own community, some examples that have come up that have been barriers to science literacy are recently our water fluoridation just failed again for another time on the ballot. And this is the first political issue that my 9-year-old son has cared about. And so it was sad to see him feeling upset about this. But what I think about is his friends. In our county, 40% of the kids have untreated cavities. And similarly, when I think about the water quality issues, thinking about how does climate and stormwater issues, how do those manifest in ways that the community feels them, we can think about our local reservoirs in Ohio. Almost all of the inland reservoirs have had toxic algae in them at some point. And this is really an issue of equity and justice if you think about who access to being able to swim in the summer. I'd say then in addition to building literacy needed to connect these dots and to leverage the power of communities, it's also important to see where the geoscience education community is and how we're thinking about these things. Carolyn Wilson and I put together a survey of faculty, and we found that the top issues that the geoscience community are teaching are issues that manifest in communities, and these include climate change, water quality and quantity, and natural hazards. And so if those are top issues that our community values, we can think about how do they intersect with building science literacy and serving democracy. So if these are top issues and I want to serve democracy, what's the intersection between these issues and building informed citizenry? What does that look like in my classes? What does it look like to teach a class designed around addressing justice issues? And I'd say one smart starting point, if you're just getting started and you're trying to figure out, how can I possibly make this join? This is new to me. One possibility is to think about switching some of your teaching over to teaching Earth issues at local scales. In our survey, we found that while 75% of faculty are teaching geoscience society issues at global scales, less than half of them are teaching at local scales. And I think this is what's also interesting is that that half that is teaching at local scales, they're also much more likely to serve in local roles on advisory boards, things like that. They're also more likely to teach diverse perspectives or underrepresented perspectives in their classrooms. And they're also more likely to make linkages between current regulations and legislation. And to me, that's not necessarily surprising. When you work on a local stormwater project, install a rain garden or something like that, or try to figure out how to manage land, oftentimes you encounter a weird code barrier or something like that that makes the project not feasible unless the system is interacted with, I guess, unless you work to see it as a system and find out what community expertise there is to help really truly address the issue. Also from an educator perspective, and this speaks to the point of what can our societies do and what can our institutions do, is one thing we can do is build value for public engagement. Simply valuing public engagement in the tenure and promotion process and through awards leads programs to incorporate societally relevant learning goals. And it also leads to higher incorporation of information and digital literacy and communication and engagement. And these are significant differences. So the next things I'm going to share with you are some ideas for specific things that you might consider in your courses. And if you're seeking more ideas, I've posted a lot of resources on this page for community and political engagement. You can Google civic engagement in the geosciences and you'll land here. And when I thought about building these these resources to support community engagement in the curriculum. They're designed around dual outcomes for students and the community. And so this paper by Mika Estrada and others on improving improving persistence in the geosciences. I'm sorry, this is in the sciences, but anyway, in order to improve persistence of students and support them, it's important to think about, what do we know about who we're inviting into our programs? How are we appealing to broad and diverse student groups? What can be done to support and attract students to work with us? How can we build a more equitable geosciences? These are the same questions that we're asked as we think about how to move community science forward and science literacy forward. And so I encourage people to think about this as a dual planning effort. How can you serve students in your programs and improve how you support them as you work to improve science literacy and build connections with your community? Okay. So as a starting place, just mirroring the process of community science, the starting place is listening and to help students understand ways to listen to the community. If you are able to, it's wonderful if you're able to invite community partners to your class to allow your students to ask them questions about the issues that communities face, or to attend community-hosted events. Those are great places for students to see what issues come up and find those connections with the geosciences. It's nice to think of the geosciences as one of many components in the system of change and not necessarily the first one that the community sees. Surveys are a good way to reveal community priorities or how issues might be, so what solutions might work in places. But if these seem a little bit of out of reach, there are entry ways that you can get students to understand ways to listen, and these might simply be reviewing local news sources and things like that, or looking at the Critical Issues website and thinking about what are the critical issues that we see in our own community. And then the next step in a classroom is to think about if we're going to be doing a community science project in the classroom, what makes the most sense here, and to understand that requires collecting data. One of the tools that I've liked working with recently has been the Pocket Lab Weather. It makes collecting temperature information really fun for students. It shows real-time temperatures, and they can move around from surface to surface and see how different pavements how different their heats are, and they can then look at the EPA website and identify heat island solutions. But it's not enough to simply say, okay, the EPA says these solutions work. They have to be some contextualizing with what's going on in the community and which solutions are best fits for our community. So they do additional reading looking at what the community thinks about land development and which projects are happening in the radar right now. If you don't have the opportunity to get outside and collect low-cost data, you can also look at existing long-term locally relevant data and or explore toolkits for Earth decision making. A lot of the climate resilience toolkits out there have zoom-in maps that you can look at and determine what's happening at the county level, and these are wonderful tools to give your students a chance to think about what they mean for the place they're in. And then finally, kind of moving towards how do you take action from the data you've collected. And if you are unable to have a reconnect with partners, you can simply have students write an op-ed on what they found and share that with the community in that way, or create a fact sheet that decision makers might use or that might inform future projects. Advanced projects might actually identify what format the people they're working with would like to see the information in and create products that align with community needs. Or students might actually attend policy maker meetings or engage in personal action. And then finally, sometimes I was thinking a little bit about the barriers that people had as they get started in community work. You have barriers of time or barriers of getting started, finding partners. project management, things like that. It's okay to be a little uncomfortable and think about ways to make that more comfortable into the future. Reflect on what worked and what didn't work. See what did your students get out of this query, how they felt about the experience, and think about what you learned. Because one of the things that I find is if I'm building towards an evolving project, I'm learning in exciting ways from the community in the same way that I did researching on transdisciplinary teams in graduate school. So it's neat to see. I hope evolution is possible. It's good to step back and think about what worked and what didn't, and then once you've done that, is there more that can be done? Because these projects tend to go in new ways when that is possible. So thank you. And just a quick announcement, if you are at AGU, there's a chance to think a little bit more about community science and help think about environmental justice in particular, and we're seeking participants at that workshop to help us develop a framework for bringing together EJ and geoscience learning. So we'll be looking at how do we do this together. Thank you.